Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. Over the last 13 years that I've been running Blackmore's, the most popular standard has been without a doubt ISO 9001, the daddy of all ISO standards. We've implemented the quality standard for hundreds of businesses, big and small, so I thought that this would be a great place to start with our first ISO Show series. So we're introducing for the first time a 3-part series which is called the ISO 9001 Steps to Success, which will basically take you through how to implement a quality management system. And that's from idea right through to the assessment. Rachel Churchman is my guest on the ISO 9001 Steps to Success series. As a managing consultant at Blackmore's, she brings a wealth of experience of implementing ISO standards, and she's going to guide you through the Blackmore's ISO Steps to Success for the successful delivery of your ISO 9001 project. So, I'm really looking forward to this. Let's get started. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Mel. Thanks for inviting me today.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for sharing your experience over the next 3 series. Rachel, before we begin, could you just tell me a bit about your experience in the world of ISO standards?
Yes, it wasn't ever something I was aiming to do as a career. It was something I kind of fell into, which I think quite a lot of consultants have found themselves in that position. So I went to work for a company that was a consultancy, but for health and safety and employment law. But they recognised the requirement and the benefit of having an ISO management system. They held ISO 9001 at the time. And the task was given to me to implement ISO 14001 and ISO 18001, or OSAS 18001 at the time.
Which is the Environmental and Health and Safety Standards,
Health and Safety Standards, yes. Mm-hmm. So it was something I had knowledge of. I'd worked for companies that held management systems previously, but I'd never got that involved other than following policies and procedures. So it was a bit of a steep learning curve, but it was something I found I understood. It was very logical to me, and it progressed from there, really.
So what kind of industries have you implemented standards for?
A wide range of industries, everything from consultancy businesses through to software development companies, educational organisations, manufacturing, construction, a lot of construction actually.
Brilliant, so really varied then. So what do you think it is about 9001 that makes it such a popular standard for different types of businesses?
I think it's because 9001, although it's known as quality management system, I always read it as a business management system. The structure lends itself to best business practice. So I think it's one of the standards that can be adopted by any organisation running a business. And it just looks to formalise all of the good stuff they're doing and help point them in the right direction where perhaps there's areas they want to develop further or improve in.
Okay, lovely, thanks. So let's take a scenario then. Let's take a stationery business. So it's a business with an office, it's got 15 staff, and it's got a warehouse of 50 staff. They've got an online presence, they've got resellers, but the main activity back at base within that warehouse is the goods in, goods out, which includes picking, packing, and distribution of goods. They're finding that they're losing out to competitors because they don't have ISO 9001, but they haven't got the first clue about where to begin. So where do they start?
I think the best place to start really is having a conversation with someone who understands the benefits of the standards and looking to understand what are the main drivers for getting the certification, first of all, but also understanding what they want their certificate to cover. So what do they want to control and improve? So we need to discuss the scope of the management system. It might be that they want to cover everything they do, or they may actually want to just focus on one key area of the business to begin with before rolling that management system out. wider.
So say, for example, with this case, we could have just head office, or we could have the head office and the warehouse, but not necessarily the online part of it. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. You have to be very careful with scope. You can't exclude areas that are fundamental to the running of the business. So you do need to consider it quite carefully. But yes, you could maybe exclude online if that's a very small part of the business that doesn't impact or integrate fundamentally with other areas of the business.
So if, for example, this stationery company had 10 sites, they could start with maybe having 3 in scope and then expand it out. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah. And that happens quite often actually with clients we work with. They will implement the management system on one site, and very quickly they will see the benefits that come from having the processes and the procedures in place and the enhanced communication that management systems bring. And very quickly they'll roll that out and extend their scope to other sites.
So why is that scope so important from a certification point of view then?
Because the management system, you can only claim certification to a standard for any activities that are included within your scope. And that can include activities of the business and also physical locations. And as part of procurement processes, organisations are now, supply chains are becoming more and more aware of scope on certificates. So just having a 9001 certificate doesn't automatically mean you have 9001 for everything you do if it's not in scope. And if you are going for a tender for something that's not covered by your certification, you do run the risk then of that certificate being sent back as not valid. So it is important to get it right.
So we've agreed the scope then. What happens next?
So once you know what you want your management system and your certificate to cover, the next stage is to see where you currently meet the requirements of 9001. If you're running a successful business, chances are there are a lot of areas that you're already doing really well in the business that are compliant with the standard. What we would do is conduct what's called a gap analysis. So this works through the standard clause by clause and asks questions to verify how you currently address a requirement and whether that's fully compliant or whether it's partially compliant and just requires a little bit more input, or whether there's a complete gap, in which case that's where we can support and fill those gaps working with the team.
So in terms of those gaps, could you share with us where you typically find gaps from the standard with businesses?
Okay, so yeah, that's quite easy really. If a management standard is new to a company, the chances are they won't have some of the more management system type processes in place. So for instance, internal auditing is a requirement that wouldn't necessarily be conducted by a business just running its day-to-day operations. Another clause is management review. So that's an area that looks to review the effectiveness of a management system. So the chances are there may not be a formal process in place for that. However, most businesses would be having some form of management meetings that can be adapted to meet the requirements of the standard. Corrective actions is another area where sometimes we find, although there's best efforts in place within a business to fix problems when they arise, it's not formalised. So the business isn't necessarily getting all the benefits from effective root cause analysis and lessons learned.
So effectively firefighting.
Yes.
Because there's no system in place to try and prevent those issues from reoccurring.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So with that gap analysis then, what's involved with that? How long does it take? What's entailed? Is it, how much time is needed from a company's point of view?
So typically it would last a day, and we wouldn't just rock up on site and start demanding lots of information, because that's not fair on the business to sort of have that kind of visit sprung on them. So we would look to engage with the business beforehand so that we can identify the right people to answer the different areas that we need to look at during the gap analysis, and also to give them a bit of a heads up of the types of records and documents and evidence that we might want to see on the day. That gives the business time to pull some information together so that we get the most value out of the on-site visit.
So could you give me an example of the type of evidence that you might be looking for then?
Okay, so I guess one area that we would look to evidence is perhaps leadership and management within a business. That's a clause that's common to all of the ISO standards. So typically we'd be looking for evidence that senior management in the business are providing some form of direction to the rest of the business, that they're sharing, maybe not at a granular level, but they are communicating with the business their aspirations on what they want the business to achieve and how they are going to engage the business into making sure that happens. So that could be through communications within the business, emails, newsletters, information being given to employees. It could be through having different layers of management meetings where information does get disseminated through to all levels of the organisation. And that can be evidenced in lots of different ways, and all could be used to demonstrate that there's compliance there.
What about procedures for what the company does? So with this stationery company, obviously they receive orders, and then they've got processes for ordering goods in and also processes for picking, packing and sorting. Are you expecting them to have documented procedures in place for everything at that gap analysis?
Definitely not expecting them to have documented procedures in place for everything. Depending on the age of the company, the maturity of the company, it might be that they have experienced staff who just know what needs to be done, how it needs to be done. More and more companies are now using software and computer-based programs to help control processes in a business. So it might be that everything is demonstrated through a central database or piece of software. Part of the gap analysis is getting that understanding of what the main processes are and how they currently work. And then part of the sort of ongoing development of the management system would then be to understand which of those processes require perhaps of some formal procedures to be put in place.
Okay, great. So what would you expect to happen then once you've got that gap analysis completed? Does that look like a gap analysis report that's presented back to the leadership team?
So there is a tangible output to the gap analysis because obviously the business needs to understand what they need to do, how we can support them. So it can either be an executive report to management whereby we are giving them the highlights and letting them know what needs to happen. But I think a more effective output is a granular actions, deadlines, responsibilities of specific actions that need to happen. And that typically becomes almost a working document throughout the project to be able to then close out those actions and implement those GAP.
And who is typically the person that takes on the responsibility for the quality management system for these actions? And is there anybody else that needs to be involved?
Okay, so in my experience, you will normally have a project sponsor who tends to be someone at a very senior level. That's good because it means that there's support if there's any authorisations or any senior decisions that need to be made. But in terms of day-to-day project implementation, we tend to involve someone who is what I call or term a doer in the business. Typically that could be someone like an office manager, someone who has a really good working understanding of the different areas of the business, someone who can communicate at all levels within the business, and someone who's not afraid of rolling their sleeves up and just getting things done, really. In terms of other people we would want to involve, it's not effective to have one person trying to write the whole management system. We try to get a team of champions in place from around the different areas of the business. So for instance, going back to your stationery company, we would be looking at someone maybe in the sort of client customer services area for orders, inquiries, possibly even sales and marketing. We would be looking for someone from the operations team, so understanding what is it that we are needing to buy in, get out, so purchasing as well. Someone from the warehouse, so understanding what that goods in, goods out processes are and where the issues are there, all the way through to logistics and supply chain management. And then you have all the supporting services as well. So potentially we'd need input from other areas of the business like finance and HR as well.
Okay, great. So we've got our team, we've got our gap analysis report, so we know what we need to do now. What happens next in terms of priorities?
Okay, so the first thing we want to do before writing the management system is we do want to get under the skin of the company a little bit more, just to understand what it is that influences them internally and externally. So it's called the context of the organisation. So the very first thing we would organise is a context workshop with the team and some senior management as well, because we need some high-level understanding of the business strategy, the vision of the business. So we would undertake a SWOT and a PESTLE analysis. So
could you just expand on what that is for those that don't know?
Yeah, hopefully I'll get these in the right order. So SWOT is internal issues, so strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. A lot of people are aware of SWOT. PESTLE is looking at external influences. So that's political, economic, social, technology, legal, environmental, and we also add on an extra E. We also do the ethical side of things as well. So that helps to understand everything that influences that business. We also look at interested parties. So they are who interacts with the business internally and externally. So that's everything from clients, stakeholders, insurers, staff families, professional bodies they might be members of. They all have an interest in how that business is operating. So we need to understand what those needs and expectations are as well.
That's great. So once you've done that and you've identified the opportunities and the risks, what do you do with that information?
So, as you say, part of that SWOT and PESTLE is understanding where there are risks and opportunities, things that need to be controlled and things that could be explored further for commercial benefit. We would look to take those and see, for those things that need to be controlled, that's where we start to look at processes and procedures and training for the business. So we're trying to stop things from happening. In terms of opportunities, we would look at developing some objectives so that we can promote that continual improvement in those areas for the business. And it really is continual improvement that drives a management system forward and is actually a requirement of the standard as well.
So when you said it drives those improvements, so is that where you could then develop some procedures, some controls to mitigate the risk?
Yes. So we would develop procedures and policies, work instructions even, where we're looking to control known risks to the business. And depending on how quick a fix is, how big a risk is, we may also use objectives to help develop longer term actions to mitigate bigger risks, if you like.
Okay, great. And what about, say for example, the quality policy statement? Is that at the beginning of the process as well, as a result of doing the context workshop?
I think, the policy is one of the policies that we would develop early on. Apart from anything else, it helps to cement that commitment of the business to developing this quality culture, this quality management system. It's something that we absolutely have to communicate internally to all employees of the business. But also it's a fantastic tool to be able to demonstrate to the outside world there's a commitment to improving in this area. So yes, we would pull together a quality policy based on the vision and values of the business. And that's something that we only get to understand properly after that context workshop.
Great, okay, thanks for that, Rachel. Thanks very much for talking us through the first stage of the ISO 9001 Steps to Success. Hopefully this will give our ISO show listeners an idea on where to begin. And in particular, I thought it was interesting to hear about the part where companies are looking at identifying those opportunities for improvement. So it's not just about documented procedures, but it's about looking externally from what you told me and looking at how we can best potentially help the business move forward. So yeah, that's a great place to start. Before we say goodbye, I know that you're a bit of a bookworm, Rachel, and you're even writing your own book, aren't you?
I am. Yeah.
Non-fiction, I
Non-fiction,
believe.
yeah.
Okay, but I think we've...
No, fiction.
Oh, sorry, fiction, right. Okay, great. If you could gift a book to somebody, obviously your own book one day, but we'll come on to that hopefully in another podcast show. But if you could gift a book to somebody, what would it be and why?
Okay, so this book's probably a little bit random. And if I was to gift this book, it would be to probably a young girl just starting out in life. It's a book called Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier. And it's about a lady called Mary Anning, who was probably the greatest fossil hunter ever. So anyone who knows me personally knows I love dinosaurs. But it's a great story set in Lyme Regis, which also happens to be one of my favourite places in the UK. And it tells a story of this passionate young girl. She was only 11 when she found her first significant fossil. But it's about how she had a passion for something that drove her to go and look for these fossils on a treacherous beach. They had rock falls, they had stormy seas. She got struck by lightning when she was a child. So she dodged all of these environmental elements because she wanted to find these fossils. It was something that she knew was an important discovery. She was uneducated, so in the 1800s, which is when it was set, girls weren't educated, didn't go to university, couldn't hold public office. But she did become very well known in geological circles, but unfortunately most of the men of the time kind of took her work as their own, and she didn't get the recognition for it. But for me, it wasn't about that. It was about how courageous she was, how she had the ability to think differently from the rest of the world at the time, because people didn't believe in dinosaurs and fossils. So she explored something and she changed opinion in her time. And I'm happy to say that in 2010, she was actually recognised as one of the top 10 scientific thinkers.
That's fantastic, isn't it? Yes, yeah. Oh, thanks for sharing that with us. Remarkable Creatures. I'm going to have to look that up. That sounds like a fascinating read. Yeah, and I really, love the idea of the message behind it as well.
Yeah. It's a good story as well. There's a bit of love, bit of love interest in there as well, but it's
Oh, good. I like a bit of that. Sounds fantastic. Well, thanks very much once again, Rachel, and I really look forward to catching up with you again on the next episode of the ISO 9001 Steps to Success, where we'll be talking about how to create and launch a quality management system. So until then, I look forward to catching you on the next ISO show.